What's up, everyone? Welcome back to our discussion about the essential music theory that you need to improvise. Today we are on lesson number 2 of this series. We're talking about something that is indispensable to us as jazz musicians, and that is building 7th chords and how we use them in a diatonic fashion. As with all the things that I share here on YouTube, there is some accompanying material available on the virtual studio for those of you who maybe want a little more support practicing some of this stuff, especially some of these music theory things. I think it's really helpful to maybe have in a handout version so that way you can kind of see what's going on, then take it to your horn and then get off of the page. That is the ideal setup. So if you're interested in that, check it out. Link is down in the description as always. Let's dig into this stuff. All right, our 7th chords. So when we're talking about 7th chords, we are talking about a chord that has 4 notes in it. It is a chord that is stacked up to the 7th degree of whatever given key we're in. Now, if you remember back to our lesson on level 1 where we talked about building triads and all that sort of stuff, that information is going to be very important when we're building 7th chords because the triads are sort of the foundation of the 7th chord. So let's check this out. We're going to look at the key of C because that's a really kind of clear place for us to start because there are no flats, sharps, any of that kind of stuff. And we'll build each type of chord that we might need. We're going to mostly focus on the 3 primary ones, major 7, minor 7, dominant 7 today, but there are a couple other ones that we touch on very briefly. Okay, so starting on C major 7. So I really like to think about all of these chords as sort of what's going on the triad and then what is going on with the 7th above that. So for C major 7, we have a major triad on the bottom, so the root, the 3rd, and the 5th, and then we have what we call the major 7 on the top. In this case of C, it's going to be a B natural. On your music, you're going to see this indicated in a couple different ways. It might be C Maj 7, maybe C uppercase M7. The one that I really prefer is C and then the triangle symbol 7 because nothing really else looks like that triangle. So to me, that's the clearest one. Sometimes on like a handwritten lead sheet, whether that's an uppercase M or a lowercase m can get a little bit not clear. So I always really like to use that triangle. So now that we have that starting place of a major 7 chord, our other chords are all going to be sort of based off of that, essentially. We're going to be making small alterations. So for our second one, let's go to dominant 7th. For our dominant 7th chord, we're still going to have a major triad on the bottom, so the root, 3rd, 5th. But our 7th, rather than being a natural 7 or a major 7, we're going to have a lowered 7th. So in our case of C, it's going to go from being a B natural to a B flat. If you're working on the blues, for example, you are probably familiar with dominant 7th chords as the sort of simplest version of the blues that most of us start with is built above all dominant 7th chords. So this one is indicated in music by just the number 7 after the chord name. So nothing else, just C7. I would also add if you see something like C9, it essentially means the same thing. It does have an extension there, but it is still a major triad on the bottom and a flat 7. That's really important to keep in mind. Okay, on to C minor 7. Same procedure where we think we start out with that major, we're going to make a few changes. So now it's a minor chord, so our 3rd is going to be lowered. So now I'm going to have a root, a flat 3rd, and a 5th. And by saying it's a C minor 7 chord, it implies that the 7th is also lowered by a half step from what it would be in the major scale. So here in C, we're going to get a C, an E flat, a G, and a B flat. Cool, those are our 3 main ones we want to start with. Now, there are 2 other ones that we'll discuss today, and there's a few other ones that we will not discuss today. The first one that we might not see as often, but is still relatively frequent, is the so-called half diminished chord. I usually often refer to it as minor 7 flat 5, because that actually to me really gets at what's happening in the chord a little bit better, but whatever way you want to think about it is fine. So what we have going on here is a diminished triad. So we have a root, a flat 3rd, and a flat 5th, and then also a flat 7. So a C, E flat, G flat, and B flat. This chord usually appears as the 2 chord in a 2-5-1 chord progression if the key that we're playing in is minor. If that seems like a lot of music theory or it's kind of going over your head right now, you know, we'll get to that stuff in the next probably lesson or maybe 2 lessons about understanding those 2 5s, but that's where this one usually occurs. And then finally for today, we have the so-called fully diminished 7th chord. Again, we have a diminished triad on the bottom, and then we have a twice flatted 7th as the 7th note. Now, the actual easier way I think to think about that 7th is it would be the same as the 6th note of the key that we're in. So if we're looking at it in C, our diminished triad would be C, E flat, G flat. And then if we just think about what the 6th note of C major is, for example, it's going to be an A. That's going to be the same as our twice flatted 7. This chord usually appears as sort of a passing chord, so it's not one that we usually encounter a ton, but it is the one that we want to know how to construct so we kind of know what's going on. Understanding these diminished chords with a little more depth is important the farther along you get, but for now, I would just worry about the basic arpeggio and understanding what's going on there. All right, that takes us through all of our sort of foundational seventh chord construction. Now, how do you practice these? That's really the question. All that information is, in all honesty, pretty dry. It's not super interesting, super flashy. It can be kind of opaque about how you get that from like a music theory idea into your playing. So there's two things that I would work on with this. The first is understanding inversions. We talked about this a little bit in level 1 of this music theory discussion when we were talking about triads. The same procedure would happen here. We would get an extra inversion because now we have 4 notes in the chord. Let's look at it on a C dominant 7th chord. Now remember, this is the one that has a flat 7. So again, I'm going to take the same procedure where I play it in root position, C, E, G, B flat. To create the first inversion, I move the C from the bottom. It jumps to the top. Now my E natural is on the bottom. I could do that same procedure all the way until I get the B flat on the bottom. And then if I go one more time, it's going to be in root position again, just an octave higher. Now, to take this into your actual practice, I would take that inversion pattern of whatever chords you're trying to work on, whether it be I'm going to do all of my major 7 chords in like 12 keys, or my dominant 7 chords, or maybe it's all the chords that happen to be in the given song that you're working on. And I would move them through an exercise where you're just moving through those arpeggios. I like to use an approach note before each target note. So for example, when we look at it here in C7, my target note for the root position one that starts on C is a C. So I'm actually going to start a half step below that on the offbeat. So essentially the and of 4, I'm going to play a B natural and then up the arpeggio. That's just going to give it a little bit more sort of an idiomatic sort of feel, something that we might actually use when we're improvising. We might go up and then do the same thing going down through the chord. Now from there, you're going to want to move this into a song and into an actual chord progression. So if you're in this phase where you're working on getting these dominant 7th chords together, it's very likely that a song that would be appropriate for developing that skill would be the tune Song for My Father by Horace Silver. So this is a song that only has a couple of different chord changes. It's at a relatively friendly tempo, only 2 different chord qualities. So you would take the same exercise and move it into the tune. There's a lot of variations you could do here. The one I'm going to show you, I'm going to go up one measure of the arpeggio, down the next. Up, down, and so on and so forth. There will be the places where the chords only happen 1 new chord per each bar, then I'm just going to go up. But you could do it in whatever way you want. You could start on all the roots of the chords, you could start on all the thirds of the chords, you could start on all the 7ths of the chords and go down. You could use approach notes, you could not use an approach note. There's lots of variations, just choose whichever works best for you and get some of this foundational practice in. I cannot overemphasize how important it is to be able to spell these chords just instantaneously. If there's any hesitation or second thought about where the chord tones are, both from a music theory standpoint and also from a hearing standpoint, which a lot of times is the more difficult part to develop for most people, it'll be hard to develop this aspect of your playing. So it takes a fair amount of slow, repetitive, in all honesty, boring practice to make this happen. So just make sure you're investing the time here. It's going to end up sounding a little bit like this. Cool. Hopefully that gives you a good understanding about how to build these 7th chords. Now, the flip side of this is how do we actually see this in a tune? And how do we understand how this connects to the chord changes that we actually see? So for that, we want to discuss something called diatonic chords or diatonic harmony. When we talk about something being diatonic, it means it's all in the same key. So to build these 7th chords in a key, it's going to create a predictable pattern of major and minor chords that is going to be the same for all major scales. Now, the actual chords are going to be different, obviously, but the qualities of the chords are going to be the same. So let's break this down, see what's going on. This is a super important concept if you're looking to learn how to like analyze a tune and think about, oh, there's a 1 chord, there's a 2-5 chord progression, all this type of stuff, which is so important as we're learning to improvise. All right, so we've got our C major scale. And just like we talked about in the first lesson, we might think in terms of scale degrees where like the first note is 1 or the root, the second note is 2, 3, so on and so forth. If we stacked up chords above each one of those notes and just stayed in the key of C major, we would get these chords. And they would have this predictable pattern of major and minor. So for example, the 1 chord, because we're in C major and we have no flats or sharps, it's going to be a major 7 chord because it has a C, an E, a G, and a B natural in it. But if we go to the 2 chord and we look at those notes, it has a D, an F, an A natural, and a C. So you've got to think, all right, well, what kind of chord quality is that? It is a minor chord in this case, because if it was D major 7, we would have a D, we'd have the major 3rd, which would be an F sharp. Here we have an F natural, so it's moved down a half step. We'd have the 5th, which we do, and then we would have the major 7, which would be a C sharp, but here we have a C natural. So it is a type of chord that has a lowered 3rd and a lowered 7. That makes it a minor 7th chord. And so in any major scale, the 2 chord, or the note that is, or the chord that is based off of the second note of the scale, it is going to be a minor chord as long as we are staying diatonic to that key. Now, this pattern continues up through the scale. Our next chord would be E minor. Again, we could think about what's going on here. Harmonically, we have an E, G, B natural, and D, because those are the notes that are in the scale. But if we thought about what was in an E major 7th chord, again, as sort of our starting point, we'd have a G sharp and a D sharp. Here we have a G natural and a D natural. So again, a lowered 3rd, lowered 7th, that is a minor chord. So 3 chords, they are minor when we are diatonic, and we can build the rest of our chord qualities as we go. So for example, 4 and 5 are major. Well, I should really say, 4 is major 7, 5 is dominant 7, so it's a major triad, but a dominant 7th. 6 is minor, 7 is half diminished, and then obviously when we're back at the top, it's gonna be a major 7 again. So this pattern of major, then 2 is minor, 3 is minor, 4 is major, 5 is dominant, 6 is minor, 7 is half diminished. Incredibly important, and is one of the most important foundational music theory kind of items you could develop regardless of style. All tunes rely, I can't say all, I guess, but many, many tunes rely on this music theory concept. Again, that's some pretty dry music theory, really stuff that's maybe like, well, Sean, that's interesting. What the heck do I do with this? Let's talk about how to practice this. This is a place where you might want to go to what we might call some diatonic 7th chord scale patterns. Not only are these great for improvisation, just getting your way through chords better, but they're also really great for navigating the horn. They're relatively technically difficult to navigate with a great sound, good intonation across the entire range. So each one of those chords that we just discussed, we are going to arpeggiate up through it or down through it or anything like that. So let's hear what it sounds like if I go up through each one of those diatonic 7th chords. Just as important is being able to go down through all of them. One of the ones that I really like to do is alternating, where you go up the first chord, down the next one. That one lays really well on the horn. You could even combine this with strategies like breaking up the chord, where you maybe go 3rd, root, 5th, 7th, and move this up and down the horn. Now, all the foundations that we laid today, building all the types of 7th chords, thinking about diatonic chords, are some of the most important music theory concepts that you can learn if you want to be a successful jazz musician or a successful improviser in this style, I should say. I find that many students, while they might know, okay, a dominant 7th chord is a major triad with a flat 7, maybe they can do that in C, F, B flat, but then when it gets maybe to like D flat, G flat, B major, not quite as strong. So when you encounter some tunes that are a little harder, cover a little wider variety of chords, something that the foundation that you thought was there maybe was a little bit shaky. Now, surely all of us would probably rather play in B flat major than in B major, at least if we're playing trombone or trumpet or something like that. But got to make sure you develop this stuff across all the different keys, have a really good grasp of it from a theory standpoint, from a technique standpoint on the horn, and probably most importantly from an ear standpoint, so you can hear where this stuff is. And I promise if you invest that sort of slow, diligent, admittedly kind of boring practice in this stuff, it will serve you well as you continue to grow as a musician. Cool. I will see you in the woodshed.